Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Ali Janayanlar. Fresh off his inauguration and the unveiling of his new cabinet, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan headed to Brussels to attend the annual NATO Leaders Summit. Many were expecting a tense atmosphere as Turkey's relations with the 60-plus-year alliance have been shaky these past few years. Ever since a failed military coup 2 years ago, the Turkish government has implemented stricter measures at home and drastically changed its policies abroad, moves that have raised eyebrows among some NATO partners. The U.S. recently warned about Turkey's drift towards Russia, saying it could threaten the alliance's compatibility. Despite the recent setback, NATO leaders displayed a show of unity, especially in regards to Turkey. The 29-member bloc vowed to protect Turkey's southern border from terrorism and along its border where Washington and Ankara have been most at odds, mainly due to the U.S.'s support for the YPG terror group in northern Syria. So, what does this all mean for Turkey's position in NATO and its changing relations with other countries like Russia? Well, to discuss this, joining me now is Mustafa Kibaroğlu, who is the chair of the Department of Political Science and International Relations at MEF University, and Sean Michael Cox, who is a lecturer at Bahçeşehir University. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us here on Straight Talk. Sean, let me start off with you. What's the real crisis in NATO? Is it President Trump's sort of rhetoric? Is it Russia? Or is it Turkey? Or is it all of the above?
Honestly, there isn't really a crisis in NATO per se. A lot of it has to do with perception and the shenanigans of Donald Trump. There were expectations of this recent summit reinforcing the role of NATO in the future, how they would come together as an organization to face challenges along Turkey's southern border, to face challenges of a rising Russia, challenges of a rising China. But generally speaking, it's business as usual. There are always little crises popping up all over, and they did more or less a good job in damping down any concerns that NATO could be threatened as an organization.
You say it's perception, but the reality is that relations between Turkey and NATO have soured. 60 years ago, Turkey was an important strategic NATO ally in the Cold War, standing tough against the Soviet Union. It fought alongside the allies in Korea, played an important role in Afghanistan and in the Balkans. In more recent years, we've seen relations sour. What's behind this?
Well, actually, Turkey stands where it used to stand for the past 66 years, and that's why Turkey was called by its allies as a staunch ally. And Turkey did its job properly and contributed to the security and safety of the Western world by attracting the attention of the Soviet Union onto itself and also risking its own devastation, because Turkey's force posture was towards the Soviet border to the northeastern part of Turkey, and thanks to it, most part of the Western world and our Western allies in Western Europe could spend more on their economy rather than defense spending. So Turkey had done its job also properly by contributing to the peacemaking operations all over the place, from Afghanistan to Africa, and also on high seas in the Indian Ocean, etc. So Turkey stands where it is. The perception of the some of the European allies has changed, and this is not because of Turkey as a whole. And there's also other reasons that we cannot discuss this in detail here. But I would like to emphasize that Turkey values its NATO membership more than most NATO members valuing Turkey's membership and contribution.
It's a sort of a partnership that's valued by both sides. But one of the points of contention between Turkey and NATO is Turkey's desire to purchase the S-400 air defense system from the Russians. There was a summit in Brussels. Here's what the U.S. ambassador to NATO had to say. Let's have a listen.
We are very worried about this S-400 that Turkey says they are going to buy from Russia. That would be a terrible blow because it will affect the interoperability of our NATO airplanes, our NATO equipment.
So that's what the NATO ambassador had to say. Why is Turkey wanting to go ahead with the purchase of this air defense system?
Well, prior to that, I would like to emphasize that back in 2010 at the Lisbon summit in Portugal, Turkey was also blamed for obstructing the creation of missile shield, which was not the case at all. And also, when it comes to the purchase of the Russian air defense system, I mean, prior to that, there was this Chinese deal, which was also criticized harshly. But that Chinese deal as well came after long deliberations within the Turkish sort of defense industry and related institutions with the government after long deliberation and long discussion with our partners in the West, and none of which agreed to sell proper air defenses to Turkey. And Turkey was left with no other option but to provide this to its own people, because no matter how effective missile shield could be, we know for a fact, it's a fact, at least for the foreseeable future, at least half or 1/3 of Turkey's eastern and southeastern part will not be covered by the missile shield. And Turkey and the government has to take some precautions, the measures that will provide shelter and to an air defense system to that part of the country. So after all, and I know also from my conversation with people within NATO who have occupied high positions that indeed there could be some technical solutions by providing some interfaces. But what was told to me during this conversation that it is indeed a political decision rather than technical one. So indeed the interoperability could be achieved between the Turkish national air defense system and NATO's missile shield, but this is not the one that is desired for some serious concerns that there could be some flows, some interference with the Russians, etc.
Okay, Sean, we just heard what Mustafa said, and we heard from the U.S. ambassador to NATO talking about interoperability issues. Is that what is at the heart of this, or are we seeing the bloc seeing Turkey drift more into sort of the sphere of Russian influence? Is that the concern?
Well, there is a technical issue and there is a political issue as well. NATO would like Turkey to be dependent on the countries within NATO, such as Germany, such as the UK, such as the United States, that sell these type of weapons. And I don't want to say it's sort of a hostage situation, but they were keeping Turkey in such a position by insisting that they only use NATO allied approved weapons systems, and it was leaving Turkey exposed. Now the strategy to a certain extent has actually worked in Turkey purchasing the S-400 systems, because the Italian Patriot batteries here, they agreed at this summit to extend its deployment in Turkey for an additional year. So now they are starting to get the attention that they want, the political attention for the crisis. Now the interoperability from a technical perspective, it is feasible to make these systems interoperable, but there's also a great concern in terms of safety and security in getting Russian software access to NATO systems, much like they have the same type of concern with the Chinese. And that is a very real concern as well.
And with the 5th generation F-35 fighter jet sort of going to come out in the market, that's a big issue. That's
what, this is the reason why some people, as well as politicians in the United States, in the House, in the Congress, are trying to blockade the sale of F-35s. But well, when it comes to other allies and some other partners like Sweden, Portugal, Spain, Australia, which is not a member, United States did not prevent sale of some high-tech instruments and also sharing technology. But when it comes to Turkey, everything is blockaded. And so Turkey is left with no other option but to make such deals. But this doesn't mean that Turkey is drifting from its way which it used to walk all along the past 66 years. So
you say it's blocked, but there was a tone of unity coming out of the Brussels summit. I'm looking at the summit declaration from Brussels.
Turkey's air defense.
And according to Article 23, it says tailored assurance measures for Turkey to respond to the growing security challenges from the south, contribute to the security of the alliance as a whole. So my question to you, Mustafa, is NATO sort of playing the same old tune? Is this enough for Turkey? And how sensitive is NATO to Turkey's security concerns?
Well, whoever starts talking about Turkey's position should look at the map first, where Turkey stands surrounded with all these very interesting countries like Syria, Iraq, Iran, Russia, and this is not a very nice and quiet neighborhood. It's not like Switzerland, or it's not like Sweden, it's not like Portugal. So Turkey has a number of security challenges, and Turkey is 60 million population, a big country which has big ambitions, of course, and big past history. So Turkey could not be treated as a medium-sized, mediocre country. Turkey's security concerns must be properly understood, and Turkey must be offered some sort of tangible solutions which would make people feel like, okay, we are part of the West and they stand with us all the time, all along the way, not just sporadically one-off over a long period of time.
Sean, I'm going to give the last word to you. If any solution in Syria is going to be possible, Turkey and Russia have to be at the table. One, you have a country that's neighboring Syria. It hosts 3.5 million refugees in the country. The other is a very staunch supporter of the Assad regime. Are we seeing sort of countries' national interests pose a potential threat to the unity of the alliance?
That's not necessarily the case, because the national interest of countries like Austria and like Germany and France also require a resolution to the situation in Syria. And they're not able to take a solid place at the table because of their distance and their lack of relationship with the parties involved. In this instance, it makes only sense that Turkey and Russia should take the lead in helping resolve this, and that will in fact strengthen NATO's position.
Okay. Gentlemen, thank you very much for this talk.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Just days after a failed military coup 2 years ago, Turkey implemented a state of emergency to address what it says were grave security threats. The measures led to the detention of tens of thousands, along with the dismissal of more than 100,000 state employees who had suspected ties to terrorism. Having already been renewed 7 times, there were recent signals from the Turkish government that the emergency decree would be left to expire later this month. Our Can Hasasu takes us back to the days the measures were first implemented to explain how far-reaching they were.
It was nothing short of horrific. Two years ago, 250 people were killed when a faction of the Turkish military tried to overthrow the government. More than 2,000 were also injured, many of them while peacefully resisting the attempted coup. The Turkish government says it was soon obvious that the military wasn't working alone. Ankara accuses followers of Fethullah Gülen of working in different state institutions to aid in the coup attempt. Gülen is a US-based businessman and cleric in self-imposed exile. He denies the allegations. In the days that followed, thousands of people were arrested for their suspected role in the failed coup. But some key suspects, like Adil Öksüz, managed to flee. His whereabouts are unknown. Öksüz is accused of being the main civilian to lead the coup plot. Prosecutors say he was arrested on the night of the coup, but was later released with the help of police officers and judges linked to the Gülenist organization known as FETÖ. A state of emergency was imposed on July 20, 2016, initially for 3 months.
Olağanüstü hal ilanının amacı ülkemizde demokrasiye, hukuk devletine, vatandaşlarımızın hak ve özgürlüklerine yönelik bu tehdidi ortadan kaldırmak için gereken adımları en etkin ve hızlı şekilde atabilmektir.
Under the state of emergency, which was repeatedly extended, the Turkish government dismissed thousands of officials for having ties to FETÖ. They include judges, policemen, and teachers. It also gave the government the power to detain tens of thousands of suspects and keep them under detention for extended periods. The measure has drawn criticism both abroad and at home.
If you want to fight Gülen, fight him. Who is stopping you? They want to do the opposite. They don't want to fight Gülen, but to fight the opposition.
Officials say they will need new and strong laws to fight terrorism and other threats to democracy once the state of emergency is lifted. Can Hasasu, Straight Talk.
And joining me now is Hilal Kaplan, who is a journalist at the Daily Sabah, and Süleyman Erik, who is a professor of international relations at Istanbul Medeniyet University. Thank you very much to the both of you for joining us here on Straight Talk. Hilal, let me start with you. For the past 2 years, Turkey has been governed by what some would categorize as a highly controversial state of emergency. Has it achieved what it was set out to do?
Let's start with remembering how the state of emergency was declared. As you know, I don't like to make comparisons a lot, but it fits in this situation. France declared state of emergency before Turkey did, and it's because of the terrorist attacks down in France, and 260 people died in those terrorist attacks. 3 major events happened there. In the time leading to Turkey's state of emergency, Turkey went through more than 10 major terrorist attacks, and 460 people died. And Turkey declared state of emergency only after the failed coup attempt, in which we lost 251 people overnight. Our parliament bombed, our intelligence headquarters bombed, presidential complex bombed, almost 3,000 people wounded, and after that, only after that, Turkey declared state of emergency.
Okay, it did declare the state of emergency, but did it achieve the goals that it was set out to do?
I should also add, France did not neighbor Daesh and YPG terror organizations.
Those are the realities
like
of Turkey.
And what it achieved. Turkey went through not just terror attacks, but a failed coup attempt. And we have to look deep into this organization that made this coup attempt possible, the Gülenist, the FETÖ organization. They infiltrated the state, and they have a very unique hierarchy system. For instance, the civilians who led the coup on the night of the coup in the Akıncılar Air Base, which was the headquarters of the coup attempt, there were 30 civilians there, and 5 of them were chief imams, as they call it in their organizations. And these civilians, in their ordinary life, 2 of them were teachers, 1 of them was a businessman, the other one was a realtor. But in the end, we saw in the footage from that night, soldiers, even brigadiers, are saluting them in that airbase. So we have this infiltration problem in Turkey with FETÖ, and in order to deal with this, the state of emergency gave the state the right to clear the state from this infiltration threat.
Okay, Süleyman, Hilal made a reference to France. Many countries in Europe say that they're sympathetic to Turkey's security challenges. They understand the situation that Turkey is in. But do you feel that there is a biased assessment of Turkey's situation? Are they sympathetic to the security challenges that Turkey faces?
Yeah, of course, there are obvious biases of European states and Western countries. But we have to look at ourselves first. We have to check what we make mistake, how we can manage the perception of the Western countries. Secondly, of course, how we can manage their public opinion. Okay, the public opinion of the Western countries are, of course, more democratic, and they can perceive, they can receive the news and everything, but it can easily be politicized. So I think we have to look at ourselves first. There is biases, but we didn't done our job well.
Okay, so we didn't do our homework,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
Turkey hasn't done its homework. How has the implementation of the state of emergency sort of affected Turkey's image abroad?
I mean, not much actually. It doesn't damage too much. There is a bias against President Erdogan, now executive president of Erdogan. I think they try to create somehow an authoritarian image of our president. Okay, this is their first biases. Okay, this is somehow they need the evil to show their public. Okay. The only problems of Turkey, they try to show as a President Erdogan. But this is completely wrong. I mean, this is completely misguiding of the public opinion.
All right, Hilal, let me turn to you. Süleyman said it hasn't sort of tarnished Turkey's image, but rather perhaps the the image of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. I'm going to put you out a couple of quotes. The European Commission has said more than 150,000 people have been taken into custody. More than 78,000 people have been sort of arrested, and more than 100,000 civil servants been dismissed from their posts. Was this overkill?
Like I said, we are not dealing with regular terrorists. I mean, the Turkish army's tanks were targeting civilians that night. Turkish army's F-16s bombed these countries' parliament and presidential complex and other places that night. So we call them terrorists, but they are not your regular terrorists. They are terrorists that infiltrated our state and used their power through this infiltration to attack our state. So, as I said in my earlier speech, they have this very weird civilian hierarchy that we don't really understand. So, for instance, they ask, why are so many teachers suspended? What does a coup have to do with teachers? 2 teachers gave orders on the night of the coup in the Akıncılar Air Base. You can see it from CCTV footages. Soldiers saluting civilians. So the West needs to look further and deeper into this FETÖ organization and try to understand what Turkey is dealing with at the moment.
There is hope that this state of emergency will be lifted by the AK Party government. Do you think that this will bring hope that the country will sort of return to a sense of normalcy after this?
Actually, under state of emergency, I don't see that regular people experience some sort of a state of unnormalcy. For instance, we did not see tanks on streets like we saw in Belgium. We did not see heavy armed policemen in shopping malls like we did in France, in Turkey. But what happened was that there was this struggle that the state is giving against YPG, PKK, and FETÖ, and they dealt with that problem directly in their source. So, yes, the state of emergency is being lifted is a good news for us, but I don't think that under the state of emergency we went through some kind of very repressive moments. And may I also remind, the European countries did not criticize once when France declared state of emergency. And actually, France lifted the state of emergency, but what they did was Macron approved a bill that enabled local authorities and the Ministry of Interior Affairs to practice their authorities during the state of emergency, after the state of emergency. So they kind of made state of emergency the ordinary state of law in France.
All right, so Süleyman, let me ask you finally, how does Turkey move forward out of this state of emergency under a more powerful new presidential executive system?
The executive agreement, somehow President Erdogan has got executive authority. So we don't need to continue to a state of emergency. I don't agree with the Hilal actually, because somehow in Turkish case, we have to explain Turkey. We don't separate from Europe and West. Okay, we have very strong engagement with European countries and the Western countries. As you remember, the Nato summit, Turkey's security engagement. This is the security issue. If you keep the state of emergency all the time, as ordinary people, I can't feel well. For example, one day I walk around at least every week, 2-3 times the police officers stop me. Okay, this is not right, okay? This is not a normal situation. State can continue, state can protect the people with law, okay? They can implement law, they can use the security system, okay, without touching the people's private life, okay, without stopping the ordinary people.
I don't have a lot of time left, but Hilal, I'm going to give you the last word.
Yeah, I'm going to have to disagree on one point. I mean, there is this structured bias against Turkey, and I will just give you one example. After the coup, as you know, Turkey is a nominee for EU membership, and Turkey is a member of NATO. After the coup, the first world leader to call Erdogan was Putin. And the only representative from the EU came only 20 days after the coup. So there is this structured bias against Turkey, and it's basically West's laws. If they treat Turkey, they are equal, they will win. But if they treat Turkey with prejudice and trying to undermine Erdogan at every chance that they get, it will be their loss.
A structured bias, you say, from international organizations and countries, but Süleyman says that Turkey needs to look in the mirror and do a little bit more homework. Hilal, thank you very much for joining us here on Straight Talk, and to you, Süleyman.
Thank you.
That's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Ali Janayanar. If you've got any comments or suggestions, please do share them with us on Twitter with the hashtag Straight Talk. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, from our team, take care and goodbye.